I thought that it would be a good idea to just sit in front of a camera and try in the shortest amount of time possible to just start spilling out history. And I was kind of practicing in my head, and I realized that would take way too long to go from the period of time that I'm most well versed in to now. So I decided to condense it to just the period of time that I'm most well versed in. As you can see, I'm wearing glasses, so you can see the reflection. So you can see that I'm not reading from anything. This is going to be 100% straight from the head. I'm going to give you American history from 1952 to 1972. And the reason I picked those dates is because that's probably what I'm most well versed in. And I just want to preface this in the beginning. I am not a historian. Don't take everything that I say for fact. But if you want to fact check me, go for it. Some of the events might be a little bit out of order, but I promise you that the time frame, at least, is going to be, for the most part, accurate. So let's get right into it. In 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower and Vice President Richard M. Nixon beat Adlai Stevenson in the midst of the Korean War, which comes to a resolution, well, kind of a resolution, during his administration. Brown versus the Board of Education passes in the Supreme Court during his first term, and this overturns Plessy v. Ferguson and the separate but equal clause, and desegregates public schools. Dwight D. Eisenhower gets reelected, beating Adlai Stevenson a second time in 1956. The U-2 incident happens at the end of his administration, which is a U-2 spy craft is shot down over Russia, which greatly tenses relationships between the Soviets and the U.S. Also, the Little Rock crisis happens during his second term, in which a school in Little Rock refuses to desegregate. And because of this, Dwight D. Eisenhower deploys the Army to escort these black students through their classes. Moving into 1960, JFK, John F. Kennedy, beats Richard Nixon in the election of 1960. And this is when the civil rights movement is starting to pick up heavily. So there are marches in Selma, Birmingham, lots of civil disobedience protests that happen, and the civil rights movement gains a lot of headway during this time. Bay of Pigs invasion, an attempted coup of the Cuban government, a covert operation by America, fails. And also the Cuban Missile Crisis happens and is de-escalated within the same week, thanks to Attorney General Robert Kennedy and President John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas, and Lyndon B. Johnson assumes office. He beats Barry Goldwater in 1964 and eventually signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Civil Rights Act desegregates the public sector, and the Voting Rights Act effectively gets rid of poll taxes and a lot of barriers the South was trying to prop up to prevent minority voters. He also runs with his platform being the Great Society platform, which is to increase funding for welfare programs. But it doesn't really work because of how much money he pulled into the Vietnam War, which he effectively escalates. And eventually it turns into the Vietnam War that we know today after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution lets him use his presidential powers to escalate that war. Malcolm X is assassinated during Lyndon B. Johnson's full term, and in 1968 he decides that he's not going to run again. When he decides he's not going to run again, the main candidate that pops up is former Attorney General Robert Kennedy, who was assassinated during his campaign. And Martin Luther King Jr. is also assassinated that same year before that. There are riots in Chicago when Hubert Humphrey is going to be the Democratic nominee because he seems soft on the war, which is not what the youth Democrats were hoping for. And largely due to these riots, Richard Nixon beats George Wallace and Hubert Humphreys in the election of 1968. Nixon ran on Vietnamization and also the idea of law and order, which I'm sure we've all heard. And Vietnamization was trying to de-escalate the Vietnam War, which he succeeds in doing after he expands the war to Cambodia. So now we're kind of stretching into Nixon's second term. So I think that is, for the most part, the major points off the top of my head of 1952 to 1972.